My name is Michelle Rooney, and I'm 29 years old. 4 weeks ago, my parents sold my grandmother's cabin, the charming little A-frame in Hocking Hills that she'd promised would be mine, and used all $385,000 to buy my sister a luxury loft in Short North. They thought Grandma was too sick in hospice to ever find out. They thought I was too weak to tell her. They were wrong. When I finally told Grandma what they'd done, she didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply reached for her phone, dialed one number, and said 7 words that would destroy everything my parents thought they owned. Before I tell you what those 7 words were and what happened next at my parents' 40th anniversary party, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to the day it all started. The afternoon my grandmother was admitted to hospice. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, right after I finished showing a 3-bedroom colonial to a young couple in Worthington. "Mary's had another heart attack," my father said. No greeting, no warmth. "She's stable, but they're moving her to hospice. Family meeting at the hospital in an hour." I dropped everything. By the time I arrived, my parents and my sister Brittany were already huddled in the corner of the waiting room, speaking in low voices. My father, Harrison Rooney, stood with his arms crossed. My mother, Diane, clutched her designer purse like a lifeline. And Brittany, 4 years younger, always the favorite, was scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. "Good, you're here," my father said. "We need to divide responsibilities." Not, "How are you holding up?" Not, "This must be hard for you," just logistics. "Someone needs to visit Mother daily," he continued. "Diane and I have the business to manage. Brittany's in a critical phase with Jonathan's family." Jonathan Ford, Brittany's boyfriend of 10 months, son of my father's most important business partner. "So, Michelle," my father looked at me like he was assigning a chore, "you'll handle the visits. Your schedule is flexible. Real estate agents make their own hours." I wanted to say that I worked 60-hour weeks, that I'd closed more sales than anyone else in my firm last quarter, that my time had value too, but I didn't. "Of course," I said quietly, "I want to be with her anyway." "Perfect," my father was already turning away. "Keep us updated if anything changes." As I walked toward Grandma's room, I heard my mother's voice drift down the hallway, meant for Brittany's ears alone. "At least she's useful for something." I kept walking. I didn't turn around. Not because I didn't hear, but because I'd grown so used to this kind of pain that I'd stopped expecting it to be acknowledged. But that wasn't even the worst part. Grandma Mary's room smelled like lavender and old books. She insisted on both. "They try to make everything smell like antiseptic," she told me on my first visit. "I refuse. If I'm going to die, I'll die surrounded by things I love." She was 78, sharp as a blade, and dying of congestive heart failure. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe a month or 2 if she was lucky. I visited every day after work. We talked about life, about her years raising a family in that cabin in Hocking Hills, about my clients who couldn't decide between granite and quartz countertops, but somehow expected me to solve their existential crises. One evening, she reached for my hand. Her grip was weaker than I remembered, but her eyes were fierce. "Michelle, I need you to know something." "Anything, Grandma." "The cabin." She paused, letting the words settle. "The A-frame in Hocking Hills, the one your grandfather built with his own hands in 1962. I knew it well. I'd spent every summer there as a child, learned to swim in the creek behind it, watched fireflies from the wraparound porch. It was the only place in my family where I'd ever felt truly at peace. I remember being 8 years old, sitting on that porch with Grandma, watching a thunderstorm roll across the hills. She'd wrapped a blanket around both of us and told me stories about how Grandpa had built that cabin with his own hands. Every beam, every nail, every floorboard. "He built it for me," she'd said. "So we'd always have a place that was just ours, a place where the world couldn't touch us." That's what the cabin was to me. A sanctuary, the only place where I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the overlooked sister, the family afterthought. At the cabin, I was just Michelle, and that was enough. "It's yours," she said firmly. "I've already told Harrison and Diane, told them last month in front of everyone. That cabin belongs to you." I remembered that conversation, my father's jaw tightening, my mother exchanging a look with Brittany, my sister rolling her eyes and muttering something about rustic junk. "Grandma, you don't have to." "I want to." She squeezed my hand. "You're the only one who understands what it means. You're the only one who ever visited me there. Promise me you'll take care of it." "I promise." She smiled then, a knowing smile that seemed to hold secrets I couldn't just yet see. There are some things more valuable than money, child, and some people who need to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Grandma had asked me to bring some old photographs from her house in Upper Arlington, pictures of her and Grandpa building the cabin, images she wanted to see one last time. I still had a key to the cabin, so I drove out to Hocking Hills after work on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The winding roads through the hills were slick, the trees dripping with mist. The clearing where the cabin should have stood came into view. I stopped breathing. The space was empty. Not just empty, cleared. The A-frame that had stood there for over 60 years was gone. In its place was a for sale sign from a developer and fresh tire tracks in the mud. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. "Mom," my voice cracked, "where's Grandma's cabin?" A pause, then my mother's voice, casual and dismissive. "Your father handled it. Adult matters, Michelle. You don't need to worry about it." "Handled it? How? Where is it?" I said, "Don't worry about it." Click. She hung up on me. I stood in that empty clearing for what felt like hours, staring at the space where my childhood memories had lived. The rain soaked through my jacket. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. I drove to my parents' house that evening. My father answered the door with a glass of scotch in his hand, looking annoyed at the interruption. "The cabin," I said. "What did you do?" He didn't even flinch. "Sold it. Got $385,000 for it. Excellent price in this market. The developer's going to put up luxury vacation rentals." The world tilted. "You sold it? Grandma said it was mine." "Grandma's dying, Michelle." He took a sip of his drink. "She doesn't need a cabin, and neither do you. You already work in real estate. Buy your own property." Behind him, I heard the sound of champagne being uncorked. Brittany appeared in the hallway, grinning, holding up her phone to show someone on FaceTime. "Jonathan, look, the view from my new loft. Isn't it amazing?" "You bought her a loft?" My voice was flat. "With Grandma's cabin money?" My father shrugged like I'd asked about the weather. "Short north, 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, rooftop access. Brittany needs to make the right impression on the Fords. Jonathan's family is particular about where people live." That cabin was supposed to be mine. "And what would you do with it?" My mother appeared behind my father, arms crossed. "You'd probably just sell it anyway. You're a realtor. Everything's a transaction to you people." The irony of that statement, coming from a woman who had just sold her mother-in-law's property without permission, was almost too much to process. Brittany sauntered into the foyer, still on FaceTime with Jonathan. "Don't be jealous, Michelle. It's not a good look." She smiled all teeth. "Maybe if you'd picked a better boyfriend, someone with connections, you could afford nice things too." I looked at my parents, at my sister, at the life they'd built where I was always the afterthought, always the one whose needs came last. Does Grandma know? Silence. Does she know you sold her cabin? My mother's face hardened. "She's in hospice, Michelle. She's on morphine half the time. She doesn't need to know anything that might upset her." "You mean you don't want her to know?" "I mean," my mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and threatening, "that if you tell her and it causes her stress and something happens, that will be on you. Do you want to be responsible for killing your grandmother?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. I should have backed down. The old Rochelle would have. But something had shifted inside me. Something had finally broken. "Grandma has a right to know what happened to her property," I said quietly, "and I won't lie to her." I turned and walked out before they could respond. They had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep that night. My apartment felt smaller than usual, a modest 1-bedroom in Clintonville that my parents had always mocked as proof of my poor life choices. I sat on my secondhand couch, staring at a framed photograph on the bookshelf. Grandma Mary and Grandpa Robert standing in front of the cabin the day they finished building it, 1962. Her face luminous with joy, his arm around her waist. That cabin, the one they'd sold like it was nothing. My mother's words circled in my head. "If something happens, that will be on you." Was she right? If I told Grandma, would the shock hurt her? Would I be causing more pain in her final days? But then I remembered what Grandma had always taught me. Truth can wound, she'd said once when I was 12 and I didn't want to tell my parents I'd failed a math test. But lies always wound deeper. They just take longer. And then something else occurred to me. I'm a real estate agent. I work with real estate records every single day. I pulled my laptop onto my knees and opened the county assessor's website. If the cabin had been sold, there would be a record, a deed transfer, documentation. I typed in the address. What I found made my blood run cold. The cabin had been sold, yes, but not by my grandmother. The seller listed on the deed was Harrison Rooney. My father had sold property he didn't own. I kept digging, pulled the original deed, the chain of title going back to 1962. The cabin had never been transferred to my father, not ever. It was still in my grandmother's name. He'd committed fraud. I sat back, my mind racing. My father, who lectured me constantly about smart investments and legitimate business practices, had just committed real estate fraud, a crime I could recognize because I literally worked in this industry every day. By 3 a.m., I'd made my decision. Grandma deserved the truth, and I was going to find out what else my parents had been hiding. That's when everything changed. Grandma was awake when I arrived the next morning, propped up against her pillows, watching the sunrise through the window. "You look like you haven't slept," she said softly. I haven't. I pulled a chair close to her bed, took her hand. "Grandma, I have to tell you something, and it's going to hurt." Her eyes, still sharp despite everything, studied my face. "Then tell me." So I did. The empty clearing, the $385,000, the luxury loft in Short North gleaming in Brittany's name, my father's casual dismissal, my mother's threat. I told her all of it, and then I told her what I'd found. "Grandma, Dad sold the cabin, but he didn't own it. I pulled up the records on my phone. The deed is still in your name. He committed fraud." I braced myself for tears, for shock, for the kind of devastation that might break what was left of her fragile heart. Instead, Grandma Mary let out a long, slow breath. Not a gasp of pain, not a cry of betrayal, a sigh, the sigh of someone who had seen this coming. "Grandma?" I whispered. She turned to look at me, and her expression wasn't grief-stricken. It was calm, almost resigned. "I knew this might happen, sweetheart." "You knew?" "I know my son." Her voice was steady. "I've watched him become this person for 40 years. I hoped he'd change, but I also prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't." My mind raced. Prepared how? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached toward her bedside table. "Hand me my phone, would you?" I passed it to her, confused. She scrolled through her contacts with surprising dexterity, found a name, and pressed call. Then she put it on speaker. 3 rings, then a man's voice, deep and measured. "Mary, how are you feeling?" "I'm dying, Michael, but I'm clear-headed, and it's time." A pause. "I understand. When?" "Sunday, Harrison and Diane's anniversary party, at the house. I'll prepare the documents. Thank you, old friend." She ended the call and looked at me with a small, knowing smile. "Grandma." I stared at her. "Who is Michael?" "Michael Carrick," she said, setting the phone down gently. "He's been my attorney for 30 years. He was your grandfather's closest friend." "You have your own attorney?" "I have many things your father doesn't know about, Michelle." Her eyes twinkled despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "Harrison assumes he understands everything about my affairs. He's always assumed. That's his greatest weakness." I felt like I was standing at the edge of something vast, looking down into depths I couldn't see. "What's happening on Sunday at Mom and Dad's anniversary party?" "Justice," Grandma squeezed my hand. "Delayed, perhaps, but justice nonetheless." I'll never forget what she said next. "I don't understand," I said. "You don't need to understand everything yet." She leaned back against her pillows, suddenly looking more tired. "I just need you to do one thing for me. Anything. Come to the party, dress nicely, and bring your patience. A ghost of a smile, the kind of patience I taught you when you were learning to fish at the cabin and wanted to throw your rod in the water. I almost laughed despite everything. That bad? Worse. Her expression softened. But necessary. Your father and mother need to learn that actions have consequences, and I've spent 6 years making sure that when the lesson finally came, it would be unforgettable. 6 years? She'd been planning something for 6 years? Grandma, what did you do? She closed her eyes, exhaustion winning out. I protected you, sweetheart, the way I should have protected you all along. I'm only sorry it took me so long to act. I sat with her until she fell asleep, my mind spinning with questions. Michael Carrick, Sunday, my parents' 40th anniversary party. Something was about to change. I could feel it. I just didn't know what. Little did they know, I was already 3 steps ahead. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a small law office on the outskirts of Columbus. Michael Carrick was nothing like I'd expected. He was in his late 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, his movements slow but precise. His office smelled of old leather and paper, lined floor to ceiling with legal volumes. Michelle Rooney, he extended his hand. Your grandmother speaks of you constantly. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Mr. Carrick? Michael, please. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit. Your grandmother asked me to explain a few things before Sunday. I sat. My hands were trembling slightly. Your grandmother is a remarkable woman, Michael began. She's also far more astute than her children give her credit for. She's been observing and planning. Planning what exactly? He folded his hands on the desk. Tell me, Michelle, do you know who owns the house your parents live in? They do. Grandma gave it to them when Grandpa died. Michael's expression didn't change. Is that what they told you? It's what everyone says. Everyone's wrong. He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. Your grandmother allowed Harrison and Diane to live in that house rent-free, but she never transferred ownership. Not legally, not ever. I stared at the document in front of me. The property deed. Mary Rooney's name clear as day. No transfer, no amendment. They've been living in her house for 12 years, I said slowly, thinking it was theirs. Precisely. My head was spinning. But why would Grandma let them believe? Because she was watching, Michelle. Michael leaned forward, watching to see if her son would prove her fears wrong. Unfortunately, he did exactly what she expected. That night, I returned to my apartment and began searching. Grandma had given me a box of old belongings years ago. Photographs, letters, pressed wildflowers from the hills around the cabin. I'd never looked through it carefully. It felt too intimate, like reading someone's diary. But now I needed answers. I found it near the bottom, beneath a stack of faded photographs of summers at the cabin. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My name written in Grandma's elegant script. And beneath it, 6 words. For Michelle, when you need to understand. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a photograph of the cabin and a copy of a legal document. The header was partially obscured, but I could see Grandma's signature at the bottom, dated 6 years ago, and in her handwriting, a note clipped to the corner. The house never left my hand, sweetheart. It was only borrowed, and some borrowers don't deserve the privilege. I read it 3 times. Then I understood. Sunday's party was being held at my parents' house, the same house they treated as their own for 12 years, where they'd hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings, where they'd made decisions about selling Grandma's cabin like they had the right. But they didn't own it. They never had. My father had built his entire sense of status on a foundation that didn't exist. I thought about all the times he'd lectured me about real assets and smart investments, all the times he'd mocked my small apartment while standing in a home he didn't actually own. The irony was almost too perfect. The night before the party, Grandma called. Her voice was weaker than before, and I could hear the effort each word cost her, but her mind was still razor sharp. Michelle, are you ready for tomorrow? I think so. I paused. Grandma, are you sure about this? It's their 40th anniversary, in front of all those people. That's precisely why it needs to be tomorrow. She took a slow breath. Your father sold my cabin in front of everyone. He announced it at that family dinner last month like it was his decision to make. He didn't ask me. He didn't think about you. He assumed I was too weak and you were too quiet to matter. I closed my eyes. I remember. Then you understand why the lesson needs witnesses. Her voice softened. I'm not doing this for revenge, sweetheart. Revenge is empty. I'm doing this because it's right, and because you deserve to be protected, especially after I'm gone. Tears burned behind my eyes. Grandma, I should have acted sooner. I watched how they treated you for years, and I kept hoping Harrison would change. That was my mistake. Love made me blind for too long. It's not your fault. Maybe not entirely, but I can still make it right. A pause. I don't have much time left, Michelle. The doctors say weeks, but I think it's less. I can feel it. So I need to know. Do you trust me? Always. Then come tomorrow. Wear something that makes you feel strong. And no matter what happens, remember, you are not the villain in this story. You never were. We said goodnight. I held the phone against my chest for a long time after she hung up. Tomorrow would change everything. I just had to be ready to let it. Sunday arrived with pale winter sunlight and the kind of crisp air that makes everything feel sharper. My parents' house in Upper Arlington looked almost festive. Someone had hung a happy 40th anniversary banner across the porch. Cars lined the circular driveway and spilled onto the street. I parked at the far end and sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. I'd chosen a burgundy dress, simple but elegant, pearl earrings that Grandma had given me for my 21st birthday, my hair pinned back neatly. Armor for a battle I didn't fully understand. Inside, the house buzzed with about 35 guests, aunts and uncles I saw only at holidays, neighbors from the old days, a handful of my father's business associates. I recognized Mr. Ford near the fireplace, Jonathan standing beside him with Brittany on his arm, showing off her engagement ring. They'd gotten engaged last week, apparently. No one had told me. The living room drew my eye immediately. Above the fireplace, a massive photograph of my parents on their wedding day. Around the room, flowers, champagne, a 3-tiered cake. Celebrating 40 years of marriage. Celebrating 40 years of lies. My mother stood near the dining table in a silver designer dress, accepting compliments like a queen receiving tribute. My father hovered nearby, working the room with practiced charm. And in the far corner, almost invisible among the crowd, sat Michael Carrick. His leather briefcase rested beside his chair. He caught my eye across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. I nodded back. My Aunt Emma, Grandma's younger sister, appeared beside me. "Michelle, sweetheart, how is Mary?" "Really?" "Tired," I said honestly, but still sharp. She always was the smart one. Aunt Emma's eyes drifted around the room. Quite a party for people who never visit her in hospice. I opened my mouth to respond, but my father's voice cut through the crowd. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, please." What happened next still gives me chills. My father stood in the center of the living room, crystal champagne glass raised, commanding the space like he owned it, which I now knew he didn't. "Today we celebrate 40 wonderful years of marriage," he began. His voice carried that warm, practiced tone. 40 years of partnership, of family, of building something meaningful together. Applause. My mother beamed. "And I also want to take this opportunity to share some exciting family news." My stomach dropped. "As many of you know, our daughter Brittany has been seeing Jonathan Ford, son of our dear friends and partners, the Ford family." He gestured toward Jonathan and Brittany, who smiled politely. "And to celebrate their recent engagement and Brittany's bright future, we have a special announcement." He pulled out his phone and showed a photograph on the screen. A stunning loft apartment, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, rooftop terrace with a view of the Columbus skyline. "We've purchased this luxury loft in Short North for the happy couple, a gift made possible by some smart financial decisions, including the sale of an old family property that wasn't being used." He meant the cabin, Grandma's cabin, the one built with her husband's own hands. "The sale brought in $385,000, my father continued proudly, "and every penny went toward securing our daughter's future." Brittany squealed and threw her arms around my father. Jonathan shook his hand. Everyone applauded. I stood frozen near the doorway. He was doing it again, rewriting the story, making himself the hero while erasing Grandma's wishes entirely. Aunt Emma appeared beside me, her face pale. "Michelle, did Mary agree to this?" Before I could answer, a voice called out from the crowd. "Actually, Harrison, I have a few questions about that sale." Everyone turned. Michael Carrick had risen from his chair. His briefcase was open, a folder of documents in his hand. He walked toward the center of the room with the calm authority of a man who had done this 1,000 times. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Carrick. I'm Mary Rooney's attorney." My father's face went white. The silence that followed said everything. Michael positioned himself near the anniversary cake, a choice that felt deliberate. "I apologize for interrupting the celebration," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "But Mary Rooney has asked me to address some urgent matters regarding her estate. Given the circumstances, she felt it was important that her family and those close to them hear this directly." My father found his voice first. "My mother has an attorney. Since when?" "Since 30 years ago, Harrison." Michael's tone was polite but cutting. "I also represented your father. You would know this if you'd ever bothered to ask." Muffled gasps. Someone in the back whispered something. My mother stepped forward. "Mary is dying. She's not in her right mind. Whatever papers you have—" "Mrs. Rooney," Michael raised a hand, silencing her. "I visited Mary this morning. Her nurse can confirm she is fully competent and lucid. She dictated specific instructions for today's presentation." He opened the folder and removed a document. "Now, I understand there's been some confusion about property ownership, so let me clarify." He held up the paper. "This is the deed to the house we are currently standing in." I watched my father's face drain of color. Notice the name on the deed. Mary Rooney. Not Harrison Rooney, not Diane Rooney. Michael paused, letting the words sink in. "This house has never been transferred. It was never gifted. Your parents have been living here rent-free for 12 years at Mary's generosity, nothing more." The room erupted in whispers. My father grabbed the edge of a chair, steadying himself. Brittany stared at her father, confusion and panic warring on her face. Mr. Ford's expression had shifted from polite interest to cold calculation. He was looking at my father differently now, not as a partner, as a liability. And Michael Carrick wasn't done. "That," he said quietly, "is just the beginning." He pulled out a second document. "Now, we come to the matter of the cabin in Hocking Hills." My father's hand tightened on the chair. 6 weeks ago, a property in Hocking Hills was sold for $385,000. The deed lists the seller as Harrison Rooney. Michael looked up, his gaze settling on my father. "The problem, Mr. Rooney, is that you never owned that property. The cabin belonged to Mary Rooney. It was never transferred to you. Not ever." "You sold property you didn't own," Michael continued. "That's real estate fraud, a felony in the state of Ohio." The whispers became gasps. Jonathan Ford took a small step away from Brittany. "This is ridiculous," my mother sputtered. "We're her family. We had every right—" "You had no rights, Mrs. Rooney." Michael's voice turned to ice. "You had assumptions. There's a significant legal difference." He withdrew another document. "Furthermore, the $385,000 from that fraudulent sale was used to purchase a loft in Short North, an apartment that is now part of an active fraud investigation." Brittany's face went pale. "My apartment? But I didn't know." "Ignorance doesn't constitute a legal defense, Miss Rooney." Michael's expression didn't change. "The property was purchased with stolen funds. It will need to be liquidated to repay the estate." My father lunged forward. "This is outrageous. I'll sue. You'll what, Harrison?" Michael didn't flinch. "Sue your own mother for protecting her assets from theft? Sue me for presenting legally documented evidence? Sue the county recorder's office for maintaining accurate property records?" He let the silence stretch. "I would strongly advise you to consult your own attorney before making any further statements. Everything said here today has been witnessed by over 30 people." That was the moment I stopped being their daughter. My father's voice cracked. "This is impossible. Mother said the house was ours. She promised." She promised you could live here. Michael set the deed on the dining table where everyone could see it. She never promised ownership. There's a significant legal difference. I watched the realization spread through the room like wildfire. Mr. Ford took another step back. Jonathan was whispering something to his father. Neither of them looked at Brittany. For 12 years, Michael continued, you've enjoyed this property without paying rent, utilities, or property taxes, all covered by Mary's accounts. You've treated it as your own. You've even made modifications without permission. He glanced at the renovated kitchen my mother had installed last year. Legally, you are tenants at will, and the property owner has the right to terminate that arrangement at any time. You can't be serious. My mother's voice was shrill. We've lived here for over a decade. We've invested in this house. Invested without authorization. Michael's expression didn't change. Any improvements you've made without written consent belong to the property owner, Mary Rooney. Brittany grabbed Jonathan's arm. This is insane. Daddy, tell them this is some kind of joke. My father couldn't speak. He was staring at the deed like it was a death warrant. I should also mention, Michael added, that Ohio law takes property fraud quite seriously. Selling someone else's property, particularly a family member's, carries significant criminal penalties. The room had gone deathly quiet. Every eye was on my father, then on me. My father turned slowly, his face twisted with fury. You, his voice was barely a whisper, you did this, you poisoned her against us. I stood my ground. No, Dad, I didn't do anything. My voice was steadier than I expected. Grandma made these decisions 6 years ago, before I knew anything about them. I only found out this week. Liar, my mother's voice shook with venom. You've always been jealous of Brittany, of our family's success. This is your revenge. Revenge? I felt something cold and hard crystallize inside me. I didn't sell Grandma's cabin without asking her. I didn't spend the money on a loft for myself. I didn't lie to everyone about what happened. I stepped forward, looking directly at my mother. I'm not the one who said at least she's useful for something when I agreed to visit Grandma every day. I'm not the one who hung up on me when I asked questions. And I'm not the one who threatened me, saying I'd be responsible for killing Grandma if I told her the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Emma moved to stand beside me. Her hand found mine and squeezed. I spent 29 years being invisible in this family. My voice didn't waver. I accepted it because I thought that's what love required, shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. I looked at my father, at my mother, at Brittany, still crying over her doomed loft. But Grandma taught me something different. She taught me that loving yourself means standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. I took a breath. So here's what I want you to understand. I'm not apologizing anymore. I'm not staying silent anymore. And I'm done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The room was absolutely still. After the crowd began to disperse, slowly, awkwardly, with whispered goodbyes and avoided eye contact, Michael pulled me aside. Michelle, we need to discuss next steps. I nodded, still feeling surreal. Legally, you have several options. He spoke quietly so only I could hear. You could demand immediate eviction. Given the circumstances, your grandmother would support whatever you decide. I looked across the room at my parents. My father had collapsed into a chair, head in his hands. My mother stood frozen by the window, mascara streaked down her face. Brittany had disappeared, probably outside with Jonathan, who I suspected was already planning his exit. They looked broken. Part of me, a small, wounded part, wanted to twist the knife, to make them feel every ounce of the pain they'd caused me over 29 years. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. I don't want to throw them out, I said slowly. Not immediately. Michael raised an eyebrow. Are you certain? Yes, I took a breath. Here's what I want. The loft gets sold. The money goes back into Grandma's estate. They can stay in the house with a formal lease agreement at fair market rent. After Grandma, I swallowed hard. After she passes, they'll have 12 months to find somewhere else to live. That's remarkably generous given everything. Maybe, I met his eyes, but I'm not doing this to punish them. I'm doing it because it's right, and because I refuse to become the kind of person they are. Michael studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded, a hint of respect in his expression. Your grandmother said you'd respond this way. She's very proud of you, Michelle. I know. My voice cracked. I know she is. The agreement was drafted right there on the dining room table, witnessed by Aunt Emma and two of the remaining guests. My father signed without looking at me. My mother's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. Neither of them said a word. By the time the last signature was in place, the house had emptied. The Fords had left without saying goodbye. I later learned Jonathan had driven away while Brittany was still outside crying, her engagement apparently over before it really began. The anniversary cake sat untouched. The banner drooped sadly over the front door. Aunt Emma hugged me tight before leaving. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Mary would be so proud." "She is proud," I said softly. "I talked to her this morning." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A video call from Grandma's hospice number. I answered, walking to a quiet corner of the living room. Her face appeared on screen, pale but peaceful. Nurse Carol was visible in the background, smiling. "My brave girl." Grandma's voice was weak but warm. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted, and relieved, and sad, all at once. "That's how courage feels, sweetheart. It's never comfortable. I didn't throw them out. I gave them time." "I know," Michael texted me. Her eyes glistened. "You're a better person than they deserve, Michelle. But that's why I chose you." I pressed my hand against the screen, wishing I could hold her hand instead. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything, for protecting me." "Don't thank me," she smiled, but it was tinged with sorrow. "Just live well. Be happy. That's how you thank me." "I will." "I know you will, sweetheart." She closed her eyes. "I know you will." Grandma Mary passed away 3 weeks later, peacefully, with my hand in hers. I was there when it happened. It was a Tuesday evening, the sky turning that particular shade of purple that Grandma always loved. She'd been sleeping most of the day, but around sunset, her eyes opened. She looked at me, really looked at me, and smiled. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "So proud." Those were her last words. I sat with her for another hour after she passed, holding her hand, not ready to let go. The nurse gave me space. She understood. When I finally walked out of that hospice room, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just grief, though there was plenty of that, but also gratitude. For every summer at the cabin, for every fishing lesson, for every moment she'd made me feel seen in a family that spent 29 years looking right through me. She'd given me more than property or money. She'd given me the courage to stop apologizing for existing. The funeral was held at the small church she'd attended for 50 years. Per her wishes, it was simple. No elaborate flowers, no ostentatious displays, just memories and the people who truly loved her. The church was half full. Aunt Emma sat in the front row, tissues clutched in her hand. Grandma's friends from the old neighborhood filled several pews, people who remembered when the Rooney family name meant something different than it did now. My parents sat in the back. They didn't approach me before the service or during or after. My mother wore dark sunglasses that hid her eyes. My father stared straight ahead like a man attending his own sentencing. Brittany wasn't there at all. Too emotionally fragile, my mother explained to someone who asked. I delivered the eulogy. I spoke about Grandma's strength, her wisdom, her quiet determination. I spoke about summers at the cabin, learning to fish, watching fireflies, feeling truly at peace for the first time in my life. I spoke about how she taught me that love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing to see someone for who they really were. I didn't mention the drama. The funeral wasn't the place. After the service, my father started walking toward me. I saw him hesitate, take a step, then stop when my mother grabbed his arm and pulled him away. He never made it across the room. Maybe he wanted to apologize, maybe not. I'll never know. But I'd already made peace with the fact that some apologies never come, and some aren't needed anymore. 6 months later, I moved into Grandma's house, the one in Upper Arlington that my parents had always thought was theirs. It felt strange at first, walking through rooms filled with her presence, but slowly it began to feel like home. My parents moved out 2 months after Grandma's death. They didn't wait the full 12 months I'd offered. They said they couldn't live somewhere with so many painful memories. I think they just couldn't stand the reminder of what they'd lost. They bought a small condo in Westerville. My father's business was struggling, scaled down to half its former size. Mr. Ford had withdrawn from their partnership. Other clients had followed. My mother joined a different social club, one where people didn't know the family history. We didn't speak, not out of anger exactly, just distance. Some gaps are too wide to bridge. Brittany reached out once, a text message, 3 months after the funeral. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I am the way I am. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit in the silence the way I'd sat in silence for 29 years. But another part of me remembered what Grandma had said about revenge being empty, about truth being more valuable than punishment. I didn't respond right away, but I didn't delete it either. 6 weeks later, I sent her a single sentence. I hope you find what you're looking for. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement, and sometimes that's enough to start. Brittany and I aren't close now. We may never be. She's working at a marketing firm, entry level, riding the bus because she can't afford a car, learning for the first time at 26 years old what it means to build something from nothing instead of having it handed to her. Some doors, once closed, open slowly, but they can still open. It's spring now, a full year since Grandma entered hospice. I sit on the back porch of her house, my house now, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. I think about everything that's happened, the betrayal, the revelation, the boundaries I never thought I'd have the courage to set. I think about Grandma, her strength, her patience, her quiet determination to protect me, even when I didn't know I needed protecting. I think about my parents in their small condo, rebuilding a life that will never be quite what they imagined. About Brittany in therapy, learning for the first time what it means to earn something. I don't hate them. Hate takes too much energy, but I don't need them anymore either. And that's a kind of freedom I never expected to find. The sun dips below the horizon. The first stars emerge. I look at the photograph I keep on the porch table, Grandma and Grandpa standing in front of the cabin in Hocking Hills, 1962, young and hopeful and full of dreams. The cabin is gone now, demolished to make room for luxury vacation rentals. But what it represented, the love, the memories, the summers that shaped who I am, that can never be sold. I'm doing okay, Grandma, I whisper to the photograph. I'm more than okay. Somewhere, I like to think she hears me. I don't have the cabin. I don't have the family I thought I had, but I have something better. I have myself. I have boundaries. I have a life I built on truth instead of silence, and that's the real inheritance Grandma left me. Not property, not money, the courage to finally be free. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up for yourself in a family that made you feel invisible, I want you to know you're not alone. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's how you honor your own worth. Hit like if this story meant something to you, subscribe if you want more stories like this, and check the description for more videos I think you'll love. Remember, your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. I'm Michelle Rooney, and my inheritance is finally mine.